Good evening and welcome to the February 25th, 2019 meeting of the Shawnee City Council. I'd ask that you please silence your electronic devices at this time. I am Mayor Michelle Dissler. I'll be chairing this meeting. I will do a roll call at this time. Councilmember Zimmerman.
Present.
Councilmember Neighbor.
Present.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Present.
Councilmember Kimley. Councilmember Meyer.
Present.
Councilmember Larson Bonnell.
Present.
Councilmember Sandifer.
Present.
Councilmember Constance.
Present.
Thank you. And we have a Boy Scout tonight that is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence.
Yeah, good for him. He's going to do this thing solo. All right.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, I'll explain our procedures for public input. During the meeting, I'll offer the opportunity for public input. If you'd like to speak to the council at any of those times, please come forward to the microphone. I'll ask you to state your name and address for the record, and you may offer your comments. So that members of the audience can hear your comments, I would ask that you speak directly into the microphone. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes. No person may speak more than twice to any one agenda item. After you're finished, please sign the form on the podium to ensure we have an accurate record of your name and address. In addition, while we won't do a roll call vote on every vote, I will state council members' names who vote in minority, so our listening audience will have a clear and accurate record of the vote. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Does anyone have an item they would like to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is mayor's items. It was determined that an executive session is required. I'll accept a motion to recess to executive session for 30 minutes for the preliminary discussion of the acquisition of real property in accordance with KSA 754319B6 for the purpose of protecting the confidentiality of those communications. At the conclusion of the executive session, the meeting will reconvene in the city council chambers. Do I have a motion?
Recess.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. When you go back in. please. I started, just let me hold. I have to be back within 4 minutes or we're starting without him. That's when our 30 minutes are up. Oh, that was my insulin pump. Sorry.
That was the timer. All right.
I should turn this one off now, otherwise it's going to start going off. Okay, the next action is to conclude the executive session. Do I have a motion?
Motion to conclude the executive session.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next action is to reconvene the meeting. Do I have a motion?
Move to reconvene.
Motion's been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item is business from the floor. Is there anyone who has comments on an issue that is not on tonight's agenda? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Tracy Thomas, 13022 West 76th Terrace in Seven Hills. I know the hearing is over about the Shawnee Community Center. I'm here tonight to ask you fervently to amend the ballot so it is transparent. I've reviewed the Consumer Protection Act of 2018, and you are in violation because your ballot is so vague. It is exaggeration, falsehood, innuendo, and especially ambiguity as to a material fact. Do the math. Your ballot says it's 38 million. It's 54 million. You have to include interest. If you or a child or a grandchild went out and bought a car or a house or some particle board white trash furniture from Nebraska Furniture Mart, they would have to pay interest. That's a line from a radio spot I did, and they remember it. So you need to tell the voters, the homemakers, the homeowners, that there's interest of $54 million. $38 million is just what it costs for the millionaires who are going to buy the bonds. And then do the math number two. It's a 52% increase in the property tax forever. That's not on the ballot. Are you kidding me? How can you not say that? If you take like roughly 5.5 mils and you add the 2.919 mils and you get to about 8.4 mils or whatever, I did the math, it's 52% property tax increase that has no sunset, that is not earmarked, will never go away, can be repurposed for another thing. So there is still time. They have not printed the ballot. There's, you've got this kind of toddler lawyer. He got out of law school 3 years and 7 months ago. This is his first big project. And he does not want to put all the words in the ballot, but you need to do it. Make the motion to amend. Even if you lose the motion, you've led, you've tried, and staff may reconsider. The staff works for Nolan. Nolan works for you. And you work for the voters and the residents. And I think you've got it backwards. It's almost like Stockholm Syndrome. So Shawnee Community Center started out as just a pig of a project. It's too late, too far west. The survey pointed out, I read the 55 pages from the survey results, that when you had your two non-meetings where nobody spoke. And there's not one difference between our center and Lenex's, except ours is 2/3 the size. So it's going to go down in the polls, but so might you. I don't know why you're for this. So it started out just a bad project, but now it's also about your lack of leadership. I want you to amend the ballot and come into transparency. Let's have a fair fight. Tell the voters what it is so they know. You can't slap a speculative memo on the ballot or stick it in the envelope. That's not right, and you know it. I'm with No More Taxes, Shawnee, on Facebook. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has comments on an issue that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none. The next item on the agenda is public items. Item number 1 is to consider adopting resolution number 1870, declaring it necessary to acquire property commonly known as approximately 20.56 acres with improvements as described at 18570 Johnson Drive, authorizing a survey and description of the property to be acquired by eminent domain, and ordinance number 3254, authorizing the acquisition of the described property by eminent domain for the public purpose of providing, operating, and maintaining facilities for public park and recreation management and operations, and providing for the anticipated and expected need for future expansion of public facilities, operations, and programs. On February 11th, 2019, the governing body directed staff to proceed with the preparation of a resolution ordinance related to the acquisition of the land. There are 2 recommended actions. First recommended action is to consider adopting resolution number 1870. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. Melissa Sherman with the Spencer Fame Law Firm, and my address is 9401 Indian Creek Parkway, Suite 700. I represent Republic Services and Wayne Development, the owner of the property that's being considered for condemnation. Wayne Development acquired the property in August of 2018. It's roughly 20 acres, as noted in the item up for consideration. Prior to Wayne and Republic's purchase of the property, as I understand it, the city was approached about acquiring the property. And at that time, the city said that it had no interest in purchasing the property. Contract was put in place with Wayne Development. They moved forward with purchasing the property and then proceeded with plans for developing it. At that point, Wayne had plans prepared, met with city staff, and then received comments and responded to comments from city staff. Moved forward with the development as you would normally expect. Incidentally, I think it's noted in the memo that came with the agenda packet that we're looking at, multi-million-dollar development here in the city that's going to contribute significantly to the tax base. Also talking about 145 jobs that would be brought to the city of Shawnee at this location here. From the start of Wayne Development's meetings with the city, the message from the city was, we don't want you here. I think there was some concern about Republic being in the trash business and the area being identified as the trash corridor. Wasn't really a good discussion, as far as I know, about the specific purpose of the project that's being considered, the building that would be constructed. There were some materials that were emailed to you by my client that talked about the company, Republic, all of the accolades the company has received, the fact that it is a good partner with the communities that it's in. As I said, the number of jobs that would be brought to the community, the number of, or the significant investment that would be made. Nonetheless, the messaging was consistent. We don't want you here. However, my client, wanted to move the project forward, was obviously had purchased the property for a reason, so continued to do that. So having known that the city was presented with the property prior to Wayne Development acquiring it, we were surprised to hear the city saying now that it needs the property for public improvement. When the city has no plans in place for using the property, no funds have been budgeted for any public improvement on the land. And the memo that accompanies the agenda packet stated that there's a suggestion that there's no other property that's available for this use, when in actuality, there is 6 acres that's to the west of the subject property that is available for development that, as I understand it, was being considered by the city for this very project. In fact, a contract was prepared and circulated that would have the city purchasing that land. So it frankly, under all the circumstances, doesn't seem reasonable for us to have the city be looking at this property for condemnation. We urge you to vote no on this proposed item and not proceed with adopting the resolution or the ordinance. And at the very least, table the item so that you can take a closer look at whether this truly is necessary. The city can only move forward with condemnation if there is a need and a proper public purpose for the property. Given everything that we've seen, we don't believe that that's present here. We don't believe that the city has a proper public purpose for taking this ground. We believe that the city's actions are coming on the heels of the statement that we don't want you here, meaning we don't want you to be using this property, so we're going to take it. There is a way for the city to express those comments to a proposed developer. And if the city would like to see something else there, then we should be working through the development process, and the city should be making those comments and dealing with it in the appropriate fashion. So again, we ask you to either vote no on this issue or table it for some further close scrutiny, and whether you should be taking a property that my client paid $3.5 million for plans that haven't yet been prepared, for a project that hasn't yet been budgeted. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there anyone else from the audience that would like to speak to this item? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Tracy Thomas, 13022 West 76th Terrace. Are you kidding me? You are buying more land when you cannot manage or afford the land that you have. You know, we don't work for Neil Holman. The city needs to get out of the business of competing with private industry for Parks and Rec or for any other purpose. Now, I've worked with Superior and Republic Trash. I mean, as a homeowner, we moved our contract from Deffenbaugh after Ronnie died at Seven Hills. So he didn't die at Seven Hills. After Ronnie Deffenbaugh died and sold the company, Deffenbaugh went to new hands, and my homeowners association went with these people, and they've been excellent operators. We need to quit competing with private industry. I'd like to tell you what happens in eminent domain. One of the people that I work with where we have defeated Big Soccer and Bi-State 2 is the filmmaker who did the movie Begging for Billionaires, and it's about eminent domain, the taking of land from people at cheap prices, and especially when you had already been talking about it. I think that's really stinky to then say, well, we'll just come take it anyway. I don't know where we'll get the money, but we'll take it. So Merriam just had a sales tax vote to to rebuild their pool. And 3 weeks later, the staff announced to the council, well, you know, we've kind of changed and we're not going to do what was on the ballot. And we're going to cut the pool in half, and we're going to have you build a 6-story parking garage, and we're going to move the half of the Johnson County Library over onto that land. That's why you got to cut the pool in half, because we're going to give Valva Park to the county. Now, Valva Park was property that was seized from residents for eminent domain, for a park for the city of Merriam, but now it's going over the county, and God knows the county's got money. If you live around here, your property tax valuations went up 8 to 10% this morning. You'll be getting it in the mail. But I just think it is so sneaky for governments to be shifting land like it's a game of Monopoly, but we're the little players in here. And I like what she said. You should table this until after you see how the vote comes out May 21st.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion. Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Second recommended action is to consider approving ordinance number 3254. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Accept a motion.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Item number 2 is to consider ordinance number 3255 PUD 041811 rezoning from commercial highway to planned unit development mixed use and preliminary development plan for Belmont Promenade located in the 16100 to 16300 blocks of 66 Terrace. On January 14, 2019, the governing body remanded this item back to the Planning Commission to consider a revised building footprint that was proposed by the developer after input from the surrounding neighbors was received. The Planning Commission recommended 9-0 the governing body approve the rezoning that includes the revised building footprint subject to the conditions listed in the staff report. The recommended action is consider passing ordinance number 3255. Does the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
Second.
Motion has been made. Second.
Mayor, I'm sorry, Joe, there you are. I think there's something, there's a small, the staff item that that was recently changed by stipulation of the parties about 7 o'clock, if I remember correctly, and it's regarding the excise tax condition that is stated as a stipulation in the planning report. Is that correct, Joe?
That's correct.
And your advice is to remove that as a condition of approval?
That's correct.
And so that they can identify that with some specificity, which item is
Stipulation 22. It's associated with the excise tax,
that? So,
which is what we're dealing with in the development agreement, which will be considered at a later action, later tonight.
So we're not there yet.
So that needs to be included in the motion.
it needs to be, actually, I believe what the advice that Joe was suggesting to us is that we revise the motion to approve the ordinance with the conditions stated, with the exception that this specific item number 22 is to be removed as a condition of approval.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Okay, I will accept a motion.
So moved.
Motion's been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Item number 3 is to conduct concurrent public hearings to consider ordinance number 3256, adopting the Belmont Promenade Tax Increment Financing Project Plan, ordinance number 3257, modifying the Belmont Promenade Community Improvement District, ordinance number 3258, levying special assessments for the purpose of paying the cost of the CID project, resolution number 1871, declaring the city's intent to issue federally taxable private activity revenue bonds. In November of 2018, Belmont requested approval for a revised TIF project plan. On January 7, 2019, the Planning Commission approved revisions to the new TIF plan and determined consistency with the city's comprehensive plan. On January 14, 2019, the governing body adopted 2 resolutions calling for public hearings to be held on February 25, 2019, to consider the amended CID and the TIF project plan. A public hearing is required. After the public hearing is closed, there will be 4 actions to consider. I will accept a motion to open the public hearing concerning the modification of the CID and concurrently open the public hearing concerning consideration of a redevelopment project and adoption of the TIF redevelopment project plan. Do I have a motion?
And open the public hearing.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. You're now in a public hearing. This is a formal public hearing required by law. Jeff White with Columbia Capital and Joe Serrano with Kutak Rock will give a presentation. After the presentation, we'll have council discussion and public comments.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Jeff White with Columbia Capital. It's our honor to serve as the city's financial advisor. I'm going to start us off with a conversation about the various approvals that you have before you tonight and walk you through the business deal between the parties. Talk about how we propose to pay for that business deal, and then Joe will jump in and talk about next steps and give you some more details on the approvals that are before you. We start with this picture, and I hope that you'll find this helpful. Big, thick council packet tonight and a number of items for approval. So the one on the very far left, land use entitlements, we just took that action, so that one is complete. The remaining actions include approval of a redevelopment agreement, which is both goes to the business deal and the financing of the project. The TIF project plan approval, which if approved would provide certain revenue streams to pay for the project and also specifies what those project improvements are. A community improvement district amendment actually to a prior action of the council, which provides more of the funding for the project. A CID special assessment ordinance, which authorizes the levy of special assessments against parcels within the district for a period of 20 years. And then the last piece is a resolution of intent, which if approved, would signal the council's intention of providing a sales tax exemption for the project on construction goods and materials through the industrial revenue bond issuance process. So that's kind of the big picture of what we're asking to the council to consider tonight, and includes like the 300 or so pages in your packet to detail all that. So the business deal as it stands tonight and as before you in the packet is this. So the developer has committed to complete what the documents call the TIF project and the CID project. Those are effectively the same thing. The pieces of that are 165,000 square feet of retail, approximately 35,000 square feet of restaurant plaza and restaurant pad sites, mixed-use apartments and retail, so roughly 250 units of multifamily housing and 10,000 square feet of retail associated with that. That's on the, if you picture the picture from the last item on the south side of the project, and all of the remaining public and private infrastructure necessary to support those uses. So the developer, again, business deal is developer will assure completion of 110,000 square feet of the inline retail on the north side of the project, which is roughly about 70% of the total, through a variety of security features. So these things would happen before we would proceed with the development. So number one would be a completion guarantee from the developer principal, Dan Lowe. Second is a guaranteed maximum price contract from the constructor, which will be selected by the developer. That constructor will also provide performance and payment bonds, which ensures that if they're unable to perform, that we either have cash or the ability to substitute a contractor to complete those. Documentation by the developer of fully underwritten bank documents for the private financing without any sort of contingencies on those, and then sign leases for that roughly 110,000 square feet, which includes contractual covenants to open by the retailers. So those leases with the retailers will provide the retailers say that we promise by signing this lease we're going to complete our building and open. The developer will provide those same completion security features for all the public improvements as well. So the public street, underground infrastructure, storm drainage, and those kinds of things. The 110,000 square feet of secured development represents about 40% of the projected future revenue stream that will be produced through tax increment financing and community improvement district financing. The redevelopment agreement that's in the packet before you tonight does not require similar completion protections for the balance of the project. So just to give you a picture again, if you want to think about, that's kind of interesting. If you want to think about what will and won't be included, you can see that roughly, again, 70% of that top retail is committed. And then if this graphic had shown on this as it did on my screen before I came tonight, you'd see the public street going across that bright strip in the middle. So that portion is complete. It also presumably would include all of the support infrastructure, parking lots and drives and things like that, that would be necessary to permit those to be constructed. So with respect to the 110,000 square feet of secured development, the developer may sell individual parcels or plots, so individual retail boxes, if you want to think about it that way, but not until the contractual covenant to open have been met. So they have the right to sell those after they're complete and open without consent of the city. And then even after the sale, the developer continues to be bound by the terms of the redevelopment agreement during its term. With respect to all other components of the development, the developer may sell some or all of the rest of the components of the project at any time without the consent of the city. And the developer, after that sale, agrees to continue to be bound by some terms of the redevelopment agreement, but not those completion security features. So no completion guarantee, no, are you ringing or am I? Okay, all right. No completion guarantee, no construction GMP, those kinds of things that we talked about a second ago. We do know that the developer does plan to sell the south side mixed-use portion to Bach Homes, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. The developer has indicated to city staff that it doesn't generally own or operate restaurants in its other developments, and it doesn't intend to do so here either. So we would expect those parcels and pads to be sold to third-party developers. The development agreement in Exhibit D does provide outside completion dates for the components of the project. So with respect to 110,000 square feet of secured development on the north side, plus the balance of that inline retail strip, so 145,000 square feet total or so. Commitment date by the end of next year, end of 2020, and then the balance of the project by the end of the year following that. Total development costs are somewhere around $99 million, and the components of that will be met through the following $19.5 million of net TIF bond proceeds. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we'll talk about what those bonds look like in a second. That $99 million does assume no sales tax exemption is granted. So to the extent the council were to approve the IRBs to grant the sales tax exemption, the developer estimates that would allow them to avoid about $1.3 million in sales taxes. Developer bank loans of just over $26 million. Third-party development, as we mentioned, Bach Homes and potentially other developers of the restaurants and those other pad sites would be contributing their own financing to the project and paying their own costs. That's about $48 million. And then the balance comes from developer equity and proceeds of land sales. So that was the business deal. How do we plan to pay for that, particularly with respect to that $19.5 million of bond proceeds? So first tonight would be the approval of tax increment financing, and that would include the 90% capture of incremental property taxes generated on the site. The base year assessed value today is just over $205,000. That generates about $25,000 or so in annual property taxes. So everything above that base year level would be captured and effectively returned to the project. The $25,000 or so property taxes a year that are being paid now will continue to be paid to the city and the other taxing jurisdictions until TIF is gone. And then the TIF would also capture 100% of the sales taxes generated from taxable retail sales within the district on the city's 1% general tax, just the 1% general tax. There are no sales taxes out there today, so effectively every dollar of sales tax is captured by the tax increment financing district.
Thank you. Can you say again the part about the tax increment financing and the amount that we would get, the 10%?
Yeah.
Just repeat that, please.
Yeah. So if approved tonight, as written, the city would continue to get its share of the $25,000 a year that's paid today, as would all the rest of the taxing jurisdictions. And then the city would also get its share of the 10% of incremental taxes that are not captured through the tax increment financing district. So to the extent that the base AV went from 200,000 to $1 million, for instance, just making up numbers, that $800,000 increment would be captured, but only 90% of that would be captured, if that makes sense.
10% of the 800,000.
10% of the 800,000
Plus
passes
the 25.
through. That's correct.
Thank you.
And just one point of clarification. So the school district still receives their 8 mills, so they're still kept whole as a result of this.
Yeah, so we cannot capture with TIF, thank you, great point. We cannot capture with TIF the 20 mil statewide school levy, the 1.5 mil state of Kansas levy for buildings, and effective with the change to the statute last year, up to 8 mils for the capital levy to the extent the school levies it may do. So community improvement district financing works differently than TIF. So TIF basically takes taxes that would have been paid anyways, and it captures those and redirects them to the project. CID instead adds an additional tax, in this case a sales tax, we're going to talk about first, and then special assessments, on top of general sales taxes that are already due in that district. That additional tax is only paid if you shop in the district. So if you're not in the district, you're not paying that additional tax. But the tax rate in this project, if approved as is, the sales tax rate would be 1.6% higher on the south side of Shawnee Mission Parkway than it would be if you shopped at Lowe's or GameStop on the north side because of the imposition of that CID sales tax. The plan is also to impose special assessments. Those work exactly like special assessments that the city might impose on a residential subdivision or something, although the city generally hasn't done that. But those special assessments are actually imposed by the county, imposed and collected by the county as part of the regular property taxes every year. So there's a collection mechanism in place for that that doesn't involve the city doing anything unusual. So all of these revenues, as they're captured either by the county and remitted to the city or captured by the state and remitted to the city, are then aggregated, and we pledge those to the repayment of bondholders. As mentioned, we've talked about a couple times, part of the incentive, again, is IRB sales tax exemption, not just on the developer-owned improvements, but the item you have tonight contemplates kind of a resolution of intent to do so on the entire development, all roughly $99 million. We expect that actually will require multiple actions by the council because each property owner would have to do its own set of bonds in order to do that. So the last piece of this puzzle is that we agree as a city in relatively short order to use our best efforts to take these future revenue streams and convince bond investors to loan us money against those future revenue streams. If we're successful in doing that, we'll have a concurrent closing on a lot of stuff. I'm very much looking forward to April 30th. It's going to be a busy day. If we close on the day, we'll close on a bond financing, which you'll see in a slide or two has multiple plan series. Close on the private financing for at least the secure development portion of the project, and then close on the real estate acquisition as well. So it's going to be a busy day for this guy as well. Because we don't have 100% secured development in place, and we certainly don't have anything going vertical on that project at this point, if we do issue bonds next month, not all of those bond proceeds are going to be immediately available to pay for project costs. In fact, we would expect, based upon the secured development portion of the project, that only about 40% of the bond proceeds would be available for draw against reimbursable project costs at closing. I will note that land acquisition is an eligible cost under both the CID and the TIF statutes, and so we would expect the developer's cost requiring the property to be immediately reimbursed from bond proceeds. So maybe only call it 8 of the 20 million is available for draw, but probably half of that goes out of the gate right away as that land is acquired. So presuming that market conditions allow and investor demands allow, the general scope of the bonds looks like this. We would expect to have what we call a senior subordinate structure. So think about all of this TIF revenue and CID revenue coming into a big bucket, and that big bucket has under it little buckets. So the first bucket we fill, we call the senior lien bonds. Probably 2 series of bonds there, mostly tax exempt, a small taxable series. These would be bonds that would be sold to the public. Not just anyone in the public, though. We will require that the investors in these bonds be sophisticated investors. Generally speaking, they need to be able to show that they have the investment wherewithal to withstand a loss and a significant net worth. The senior lien bonds will have scheduled principal payments every year, so it will work like a normal loan with both principal and interest due each year, and will be fully amortizing over the term of the bonds, which under state law can't exceed 20 years. And then we'll have some security protections as well, something called a debt service reserve fund, which is not something that the city is is used to, for instance, with this general obligation debt. But in transactions like this, the investors actually make us set money aside from the bond proceeds when we issue them into an account that's there in case that there's a shortfall or a timing delay in the payments. It basically gives the investors a year's warning before it looks like they may suffer a payment default. So once we fill the first bucket, then that revenue falls into the second bucket, which we call subordinate lien bonds. As you can imagine from the name, the seniors get paid first. The subordinates only get paid to the extent that there's money left after paying on the senior lien bonds. We expect one series of bonds there. This is what we'd call a cash flow bond. So these bonds will be structured in such a way that says we're going to pay as much interest as we can, given the money that falls into bucket number 2. And if we cover all the interest and there's money left, we'll pay down some principal as well. And then the very last, oh, by the way, that will also be sold to the public. That is a very niche market. As you can imagine, I come to you and I say, hey, loan me some money. I'm going to pay you back over 20 years, and I'm going to pay you back basically as I'm able to get around to it. It's a very different investor base than the folks that are looking to get both principal and interest in each year. Then the last bucket we have at the very bottom is what we call junior subordinate bonds. Again, by the name, it's the third bucket that's paid. This would be developer held, and the idea here is basically this is an analog for pay-as-you-go. So if we can't get to $19.5 million in the first 2 buckets, the developer would have the ability to say, fine, we'll make up the difference, just pay us back as there's money available that falls through this waterfall. I will say kind of anecdotally that this senior subordinate lien structure is very common for these kinds of development deals. There's nothing about the structure that's unusual in this particular case. So really important note here, the city is the issuer of the bonds in Kansas with respect to TIF and CID, but it is not the quote-unquote obligor, right? We're not looking to the city's general fund. We're not looking to the city's property tax levy. The bond investors can only look to the money that's available generated through TIF and CID revenues in order to get repayment. They can't ever say, hey, look, we were $1 million short this year. You, City of Shawnee, have to write us a check. It's not the way it works. The other important thing for you to note is if there were a default on these bonds, it would not impair the city's general credit rating. So there are other Johnson County communities that have done development deals that have very, very high credit ratings. I'm not going to use their name because they'll be mad at me if they watch this or hear about this, but they have development bonds that are in default, maybe on I-35 South. No impact whatsoever on the city's market access or credit rating for its general transactions. I will say that if we were to structure a deal that went into default, it could be negative reputational impact for the city on the next development deal that it did, because that investor pool for these kinds of bonds is pretty consistent over time. And so it's important reputationally for the city to make sure that even though it doesn't have any fallback payment obligations here, that it's thoughtful about structuring these bonds and it makes sure that the transaction that we put together makes sense. So before we will even issue the bonds, the redevelopment agreement includes a number of preconditions that have to be met before the bonds can be issued. And this will actually be enforced because the bond market is going to look to have these same things in place before we do. I'm not going to read to you here, but generally speaking, we need to make sure that we have a deal, not an idea, but a deal. So the financing's in place, the GMPs are in place, all those security features that we talked about before are ready to go and in place, and we're not waiting for those to come in. They're not promises. They're actual documents. They have been signed, and they will be signed concurrent with the completion of the bonds. So all these have to be met before we would even offer the bonds in the market. All right. Yeah.
So we've been before you numerous occasions on this project, and so we're getting close to the end, hopefully. The next few slides is where do we go from here, timing the next steps. So the developers asked that we issue bonds. We actually issue bonds by the end of April 30th, as Jeff had mentioned. To do that, there's still quite a bit of work to go and accomplish. There's a due diligence period. We have to get some things that we need to get comfortable with. And just conditions that are necessary to issue the bonds. Soon after that, we will print the preliminary official statement of the POS, and soon after that, we will price the bonds. And all of this is to occur in a relatively short period of time. So assuming, and we'll talk a little bit about these approvals, what the mayor mentioned is before you this evening. We anticipate we'll be back again in a month, on March 25th, to discuss and for your consideration present some bond documents. It's a bond authorization. It's indentures. There's an escrow agreement that we'll be talking about, but the bond documents will presumably be presented if we could get through that due diligence period at the March 25th meeting. We may, at this point in time, also have industrial revenue bonds, IRBs, for sales tax exemption, ready to be presented, a bond ordinance and bond documents. That's at the discretion of the developer. Again, you've seen those IRBs come before you, and it's a similar situation for this instance. I do want to talk a little bit about that resolution of intent. As Jeff had mentioned, there could be some additional steps, but for future meetings, what you may consider, this resolution of intent is going to be for $95 million. The developer is not building the $95 million project. As we've mentioned, there's going to be some transfers. There may be a multiple series. What the developer has asked for is of the authority to issue in that maximum amount of the project cost. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But we may be before you again on IRB resolutions of intent and bond documents for those transferee developers. To mention, I think the developers team's here. We are up until Thursday morning. We were working to try to meet this agenda deadline. There still remain a few items that we need to work through. Some that we consider are non-substantive. Others that we think we can address in the bond indenture, or we can address it in another form of a bond document like the escrow agreement. We do not at this point anticipate coming back before you for asking for an amendment to the redevelopment agreement. But again, we're close. I would say that but there are some issues that we would consider non-substantive that we would have to work through in the bond documents. So what's before you for tonight's action? We are in a public hearing right now. You will be, for your consideration, it will be an ordinance approving a TIF project plan. In 2017, there's also an approval of a TIF project plan. In that ordinance, we're going to rescind a portion of the TIF project plan in the TIF district that was created in 2018. So it's approval of a TIF project plan and rescinding some of the prior ordinances authorizing the TIF district and the TIF project plan. That ordinance requires 2/3 vote. Also before you, as Jeff had mentioned, we are amending certain provisions for your consideration, our amendments to the CID special assessments from 1.3 to 1.6%, and then ordinance levying the special assessments for 20 years is before you. I did want to make mention of that ordinance. We just, I don't know if it was circulated or not, but there's a supplement to that ordinance to include, from what was in the agenda packet, some legal descriptions that we didn't have until today. It was how do we spread it against one property owner that owns 3 parcels. Sales tax exemption, IRBs, a resolution of intent that's in your packet. It's for $95 million, as I mentioned. That's more than what we had anticipated. We had, I think, Councilmember Jenkins asked this question at one of these meetings, what's the value of the sales tax exemption early on in this process? I think we're in the $35 to $40 million range. Based on what we understand from the developer is that they want to get the full authority, again, which is for their financing and their lenders' needs. They want authority up to $95 million. But again, we will not be issuing $95 million of industrial revenue bonds. Part of it is we're only paying for construction materials, the sales tax on construction materials. So we're going to have to resize that resolution of intent. And again, in addition, these resolutions are directed to to this developer. If let's say, for instance, he sells a portion of that property, that developer on that mixed use component, he'll have to come back, or that developer will have to come back and ask for authority to issue those bonds. They want kind of what we would consider a master resolution of intent for the full value of the project, based on what we understand the lender is asking. In addition to, for your consideration, the ordinance that approves the project plan is also an approval of the redevelopment agreement. So those are the action items before you this evening. Jeff and I are happy to answer any questions that you have. I know we've put together quite a bit.
Councilmember Meyer.
Yeah, thank you guys. I have quite a few questions, so thank you. I will just kick off. So we have the total project cost listed at 99 million, city investment of 19.5, so just over 20.5% investment. Is that pretty similar to other projects in terms of the portion that would be public dollars? Is that more or less middle of the road?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Council Member, my recent experience with large-scale projects like this in Kansas is that 20 to 25% public subsidy is common.
Okay. Thank you. So if something, we don't want this to happen, obviously, but if something were to happen and the project wouldn't be completed or doesn't happen for some reason, I know that the public dollars are the first dollars in, followed by bank dollars. Would we be the first to be made whole, as it were, or would the bank be the first person in line?
So let me answer that a bit indirectly. So I mentioned that there's pieces of this project that I called secured development, and then the rest. So the pieces that are secured, that 110,000 square feet of inline retail, will have a completion guarantee, will have guaranteed maximum price contract and performance and payment bonds from the contractor, the constructor of that. We will know that the private financing for the project is in place. We'll have signed leases from the individual retailers that will have covenants to open by those retailers. So we feel pretty confident, given those protections, that 110,000 square feet of retail is going to be built. And hopefully it will generate the level of tax increment, both from property tax and sales tax and CID, that we expect over the life of the bonds. I mean, nobody knows what retail is going to look like in 12 years, but certainly for the foreseeable future, we would expect that to be the case. So our plan would be to calibrate the release of bond proceeds at closing to be only that amount that could be supported, principal and interest, with that amount of development, assuming no other development occurs. So the thought there would be that kind of worst case scenario, that 110,000 square feet of retail would be sufficient to repay those bonds. But if that didn't happen, there's no mechanism to effectively repay the use of those bond proceeds. And in this case, because of the special obligation nature of these bonds, the bondholders take that construction risk. So as you can expect, they will be as concerned about these details as you would be, because it's their money on the line.
Sure. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more? I know it's probably somewhat limited about the clawback provisions that we have in place, what we can do on the city side.
Do you want to? Sure. Legal question.
Yeah. Once bonds are issued, our clawbacks are extremely limited. We have events of default that are blended into that are included in our redevelopment agreement. But once the bonds are outstanding and on the street, and we have obligations to the bond owners, we don't have a really strong clawback aspect. Unlike maybe PAYGO financing, when you maybe reduced your cap, our limitations right now are to not process any additional requisition requests, any of those reimbursement requests, or we would have to sue them for specific performance. So our clawbacks, once bonds are out on the street, it's extremely difficult because we have obligations to the bond owners. We will continue to have an obligation to collect and remit that TIF and CID revenue to debt service to the extent it's available.
Okay. Thank you. Just a couple more, I promise. Sorry, I said I had a lot. I warned you. So just to reiterate a little bit with the TIF and the abatement here, the amount we're bringing in, the city, the amount we're currently bringing in property taxes will remain consistent throughout the life of it. It just won't grow beyond what we're bringing in.
The whole 4,000 or 5,000
Right,
bucks
a
a year, you'll
whopping
get
amount,
there. Now
yeah.
will continue to come to the city. That's right.
Sure, yeah,
Yep.
okay. And my last question, I think actually might be more for the developer, I would say. It's more of an overarching concern. I think as this project has developed, I like the direction that it's gone in. I like that it's become more robust than just the retail component of it. However, what I'm seeing in the agreement is that we only have a completion guarantee for the retail component of it and not the multifamily or the restaurant portion. And I think when I talk to my constituents, the things that they talk about is they really want the restaurant part of it. We've talked about how there's not really high-end, non-single family housing available. I think that's an important piece of it. Certainly the retail is a part of it, but I feel like the multifamily and the restaurant piece is so really critical to what makes this development really unique and what I think we've gotten behind, that I have a lot of reservations about moving forward without a completion guarantee on the other two components. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
I agree with you.
That's my concern.
A great question for the developer on that point to explain what their constraints are.
Sure.
Any other questions? Are you done?
Well, yeah, I'm still
Okay.
curious about why we don't have a completion guarantee, but
Oh.
yeah.
They want to speak.
Or up to you.
Can you speak now or wait?
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Constance, and then
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. You got a couple of my questions, so I appreciate that. So what does constitute a completion guarantee that you referenced on the retail? What exactly does that mean?
I can't answer that question.
Okay, that's maybe more.
Our expectation is that document would provide a personal commitment by Dan Lowe, who's one of the development principals, to step in if his development company could not perform. We have been asked by the developer to effectively assume and agree to the completion guarantee that their bank is requiring of them. We've not seen that language. So Joe mentioned there's a couple open points that will get resolved. That's one of those that will need to get resolved over the next couple weeks. So we're waiting to see the bank's language so we can answer the question whether or not we can agree to line up or not. I hope we can. I think once the bank has a significant amount of money invested in this project, our interests are going to be aligned at that point. And so my hope is that will be an open deal point where we can get to yes relatively easily.
And if the bonds are in the market and don't sell, what is the process?
Yes, great question. So there is a provision of the redevelopment agreement that says that if we can't get to the $19.5 million to fill the gap between sources and uses, that the developer has the right to walk away from the deal and not be obligated under the redevelopment agreement. And the language says if that happens, the city also doesn't have any obligations under the redevelopment agreement either. So certainly something that we don't hope happens, because it will mean all this work is for naught.
But no financial risk, as you
No
mentioned.
financial risk. That's
Okay.
correct.
Real fast, Councilmember, that determination as to how much is not from the city's perspective. That is from the developers. It's in their discretion.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins?
Yes, I have a question about the tax deferrals. And that question is, I think one of the members of the audience tonight brought up the fact that our assessments are going up about 10% on the average here. I know mine went up 16% last year, so if they go up another 10 this year, I mean, my assessment for my property is up over 25% in just 2 years. I'm looking at this thing here. This is all based on a percentage of your property taxes and so on. So as our property valuations continue to go up, where's that extra money going? I mean, we're paying writing a bigger check every year for our property taxes, with or without a property tax increase. So over a 20-year period, if I've got up almost 25% in just 2 years, wow, over a 20-year period, my house is going to be worth like $10 million or something. I'm going to be paying a whole lot of property taxes. Now, I don't see that money coming involved in this process. I mean, where's this big windfall of extra money going to go to? And sales taxes are also involved here because price of merchandise goes up. Mm-hmm. And I would think maybe 10 years down the road, some widget that cost $20 today may cost $32.95 by then. So 1% of that's obviously going to be more than it is now. So where's that money go?
Great question, Madam Mayor, Council Member. So as you can imagine, the we'll have projected revenue streams as we go into the bond sale. There's one thing I can guarantee in this whole process, and that's that those projections will be wrong. That's one thing we know, is they will be wrong. They could be higher, they could be lower, they could be different from year to year. So to the extent that we end up with higher collections than what we've modeled, that will allow us to pay down the bonds more quickly. And hopefully what that means is the life of this incentive package shrinks from 20-ish years down to something shorter than that. And then as soon as the bonds go away and you've got a productive and revenue producing asset, once the tax increment financing goes away, then 100% of those incremental tax dollars are distributed to all the underlying tax entities, and the entire community benefits more quickly as a result. So basically all of the money that's captured in this stays in the system and is used to repay bondholders. And if we're able to pay them more quickly than we expect, then everybody in the community, not just Shawnee, but all the other taxing jurisdictions that overlap us benefit.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, if just some hypothetical number, I guess, we're the income to this project to pay off the bond from property taxes is $5 million. And 8 years from now, it's not $5 million, it's $8.5 million. You're saying all that's going to be captured in the process and be applied toward paying off the bonds.
That's correct.
Okay, so nobody's getting a windfall. Nothing's coming back to the community saying, okay, we got $3 million extra, so we're giving that back to the city, and we're going to continue.
We're all getting a windfall because because
the period
comes back on the tax bills.
Yeah, the time period is shortened, of course, and that's important.
Yep.
I just want to make sure we understand how that's working, and want to make sure that was clear. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Zimmerman.
It's a good question, Eric. I want to pile on to the question. I think there's 90% of that goes to the developer, 10% comes back to the city, right? So in the scenario that Mr. Jenkins just painted, if the assessed value goes up, the city's 10% of that is going to be escalated. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to, do you want to do the presentation first? Okay.
Mayor and members of the council, Greg Musil, Rouse Fretz Law Firm, 5250 West 116th Place, Suite 400, Leawood, Kansas 66211. 4 years later, and I still have to think about that new address in Leawood. Thank you for consideration tonight. Here with me are Dan Lowe and Heather Trower from Legacy, and Steve Beaumont. They are the developers, Belmont Promenade LLC. Also with me is John Hanson with IRR, who is our counterpart to Jeff White, the numbers guy. And if any big numbers come up, then I will ask John to come up here and help you with it. As you know from the past, BHC Roads has done the civil engineering on the site. Yeager Architect has done the architectural part on the retail, and Bach Homes has done the architectural part on the apartment and mixed-use development that you approved in the rezoning earlier tonight. Very thorough presentation. It's always difficult because I'm never quite sure how much is going to be told to you, and I don't want to duplicate if I can avoid it. Tonight is one more critical milestone in this project. And you've been fighting on this project, on this site, for a long time. Some of you are newer and haven't had to go through all of it, but this has been going on for years, long before Belmont got involved, to try to figure out what do we do with this site that has great visibility, great access, great location in the city of Shawnee, and yet is throwing off $6,000 worth of property tax to the city and $25,000 to all the other taxing jurisdictions in the county. So what can we do to take it to its highest and best use and make it productive so that the city benefits, the school district benefits, the community college benefits, the county benefits, et cetera? As Joe and Jeff indicated to you, this is not a final step. We've gone through a number of steps to get to this point, including in 2017, the approval of a TIF project plan and a redevelopment agreement. This is not a final commitment. you'll be back here deciding whether or not you are going to pass a bond resolution and actually issue bonds. In that interim period, the developer, Belmont, is going to have to decide whether the financing that is available, the so-called capital stack, everything that has to fit in this to pull off a $99 million project is in place. If it's not from your perspective, you don't have to issue bonds. If it's not from the developer's perspective, he does not ask you to issue bonds. But if each of the steps that were outlined earlier about each of the things you have to consider tonight, if each of those are not adopted and approved, it's a puzzle, and if there's a missing piece, it's not a puzzle. We cannot take the next step. In the current proposal, Hawthorne Bank is the private lender. Hawthorne Bank has to decide through the financing process, am I going to loan $26.5 million to this project based on what I think is going to happen to the project, what the value is going to be, and the reputations and personal finances of Dan Lowe and Steve Beaumont. The bond community, sophisticated investors, the bonds are going to be issued in no less than $1 million increments, and denominations, one person has to buy at least $100,000. So this isn't my mom and dad buying them. These are sophisticated investors. They're going to test whether this project is good enough, has enough value, has enough opportunity of success that I'm going to put $19.5 million in there. If they don't get to 19.5, then the developer again has to decide if he's going to make up whatever the increment is for that junior subordinate bond, the last bucket that ever gets paid. So those are things that are going to have to happen even if you approve everything tonight. And jumping around a little bit, but the bonds are not a pot of cash for the developer. Let's assume that the bond market is responsive and says, I got enough people to sell $19.5 million worth of bonds. So $19.5 million comes in. Doesn't go to the developer. It sits in a trust fund, a bond fund. And it's released, as Jeff and Joe indicated to you, only when there's a secured commitment that's sufficient under the terms of the ultimate bond indenture to release those funds. So this isn't some just cash pot that developer gets access to. When the developer fills out the 165,000 square feet above 110,000, the other 55,000 square feet, the contemplation, the principle is more funds will be released to the developer to pay for the eligible costs. And those eligible costs are also restricted by statute. You don't get to do just anything you want with those monies. So the point is there are lots of protections, I think, that were indicated there. One of the things I think is important as we talk about the next steps. Before your staff, Nolan and your consultants, are going to come back to you and say, here's a bond ordinance. I want you to vote on whether or not to issue 19.5 or 18.5 or $19 million worth of bonds. You're going to know who the signed leases are with. They are going to have signed leases, and if that signed lease is with Greg Musil's pawn shop, you're not going to issue bonds. That's true. That's one of the restricted uses. Greg Musil's barber shop, you're not going to issue bonds. If it's significant national retailers that are creditworthy, then you have a different discussion. So you're going to know more by the time that comes back. Some of the issues that are somewhat open in the redevelopment agreement, you're going to know before you act on a bond ordinance, because they're going to be in a long document called a bond indenture that tells you on Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. here's what the bond trustee does. Not quite that specific, but close. So this is a step that has to be taken if this project is to proceed, but it is not your final step, and you retain the sole discretion as to whether or not you ever authorize the issuance of bonds. It is easy to focus on, my Lord, what if something goes wrong? And the projects around, whether it's in Johnson County or Wyandotte County or Kansas City, Missouri, when they work right, you never hear about them. And when they don't work, you hear about them. And so it's smart, it's thoughtful to be concerned and to evaluate the risk. But I want to talk a little bit about the benefits. Because right now you are getting $25,000. We as a county are getting $25,000 off this property. You as a city are getting $6,000. The developer has submitted a projections of what we think will happen if we can get this up to the full potential of all the restaurant plaza, the other pad site, the 249 apartments with 10,000 square feet of mixed use, as well as the 165,000 square feet of inline. I think it's important to consider this because this is what you're going to weigh ultimately when you issue bonds. If you approve this and if we get it financed, during the 20 years of the TIF bonds, the city will receive $7 million on the amount of property taxes not captured by the TIF. About $350,000 a year. That's actually $300,000 in sales taxes, $20,000 in your administrative fee, and $30,000 in property taxes. So about $350,000 a year. The county jurisdictions will receive about $2.4 million a year. $2.4 million from the 10%. And the property tax mill levy, as was indicated, will continue at 20 mills for the statewide school tax levy, 8 mills for the capital mill levy for Shawnee Mission School District. And see where I am here. Yeah. In 2017, when you adopted the last project plan, the statute was that we got to capture those 8 mills. So the project was capturing 8 mills going to Shawnee Mission School District. Now that is staying with the school district. I think that's a big benefit. We talk about the changes from 2017. You authorized $19.5 million on a $59 million project. So closer to 35 or 40%. We've now turned this into a $99 million project because we got direction that said we want some residential uses in here, some multifamily. So now we're at $19.5 million on a $99 million project. The city has leveraged its money into a much better ratio and a much larger project. Shawnee Mission School District will receive about $350,000 a year, about $6 million total during the life of the TIF. New money. Now, I won't get into school finance. They may be capped and may not be able to spend all that, but if they don't, then they will lower their mill levy and everybody else will have a lower mill levy, kind of in response to the increased assessments that we have seen the last number of years. After the TIF expires, so 20 years based on the projections, the city will receive approximately $1.3 million a year in sales and property taxes, and all taxing jurisdictions will receive about $1 million, $1.5 million just from property taxes. Those are what the potential is. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm going to guarantee those, but nobody can guarantee that this won't work either. And the people that will know the best about it, I think I said this in 2017, there's all this concern about retail. You know who knows about retail and who's going to decide whether it works or not? Hawthorne Bank, which will have $26.5 million in here, and bond investors that'll have $19.5 million in here. They will not rely on Dan Lowe or Steve Beaumont to say, don't worry, it's going to work. They're going to figure out if it will work. In the redevelopment agreement, I want to make clear, we're not here to renegotiate or to negotiate anything about the redevelopment agreement. There are some things, as Joe indicated, that are open. We had some very robust and spirited discussions. I was hoping I'd get a reaction out of no one. These are important and hard terms to negotiate. We're there at 99%, but we have some nits, and we think some of them are just simply clerical. Some of them are things we believed we should have waited on because whether the city wants something or the developer wants something, the finance markets are going to tell us what we're going to have to do. They're going to tell us what the conditions are that they will accept if they're going to buy the bonds. So we can put stuff in. We just thought some of it was premature. There are some reporting requirements and other things that we're not sure have value because the developers report numbers to the city on sales taxes aren't as important as the Kansas Department of Revenue tax reporting to you. But we'll get through those. And when it comes back with the bond indenture, if it's something that either the city or the developer doesn't want, then it's not going to happen. You've been patient and you've been supportive and you've been challenging and you've asked questions and you've pushed and prodded, and that is exactly what a governing body is supposed to do. We're to the point now where we simply need your approval on all of the items tonight or the puzzle doesn't get completed and the project can't proceed. A key principle I often remind myself is not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You will never get a perfect project. You will certainly not get a perfect incentive project because it's a public-private partnership on a piece of property that won't work or a project that won't work without a public-private partnership. So with that, I'd be happy to answer your questions. I think what I'll start with is addressing the question about completion guarantee. And Dan will confirm this. Whenever he enters into a lease with a tenant, I'm not going to give any names because we can't tell you those until If we get approval tonight, there will be signed leases before we see you next time. It will include a covenant to open, which is a contractual guarantee by that company that says we're going to open a store, which completion guarantee, opening is better. If he sells off a pad site, it's going to have a covenant to open and a provision that says if you don't open within a certain period of time, we're buying you back. And if we have a letter of intent with Bach Homes, we're negotiating a PSA, a purchase and sale agreement, you'll have a purchase and sale agreement for the multifamily development before you ever have to issue bonds. And it will, our plan is to have a covenant to open in there. And as Jeff said, our interests are fully aligned, the cities and ours. If we don't have contracts in place to build the project, we don't get the escrow money released for all of the projects, all of the public improvements that we will have to build. So everybody is aligned in getting that done. And we do have to work on what that completion guarantee looks like and the amount of security that both the city wants, that the developer can provide, and that the bond market and the private lenders say they have to have. And there are some issues about who's senior and subordinate to that because we've got all these lenders that have to fit into place and fall into the slots at the same time. And some of it's chicken and egg stuff. And I know that's frustrating having been in your shoes, is that, you want to know all the slots. I can't tell you all the slots tonight.
I just want to know they're going to be built more than I need to know the specific tenants, I would say.
I'm sorry?
I more want to know that they're going to be built more than I need the specific tenants.
Right.
Yeah.
Both are important factors. But without this all being built, then these projections don't work. The other thing I would say about the bonds is if we get $19.5 million in bonds, and the only part of the project is the build is the 40% that Jeff mentioned. The rest of those bond monies are still held there. And after 3 years by IRS regs, they have to go back and repurchase, pay back the bonds. They don't just sit there as a continuing obligation forever. They're used to redeem the bonds and pay back the bondholders so that nobody is out anything. And that's not the project we want or you want. But there are self-limiting kind of restrictions or regulators on this process that give every incentive to the developer for either moral or financial reasons to get this built and done. I'd be happy to answer other questions, Mayor.
Any other questions
Or our
or
team would
comments
be.
from council? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the audience that would like to speak to this item? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
I'm leaving. She's got my hat.
Tracy Thomas, 13022 West 76 Terrace. One of the things I like about you, Mr. Musil, is you've been in their chair. You've been on a city council, a very successful one. And so you understand what these people have to do, and I think you expressed that language. It is sad that within the next couple of years, you won't be able to go to a store and not pay that sales tax lug. But the developers are now running the county. And if you want a landlord to fix their crumbling sidewalks or redo their signage, they're going to come to you and say, oh, we've got good offers from other cities, but, we'll only do stuff we'll only fix up the properties here if you give us a kickback on the sales tax. But that's the modern landscape. When Mr. Musil ran for city council in Overland Park, he would raise money just like we all did and I did. And I'd like to suggest something. We don't know who the tenants are going to be. But I would like to suggest that since 6 of you are up for re-election this fall, one has a primary right now in August, but all 6 of you will be on the ballot in November, that you would take a pledge. This has been a controversial project. I think you're going to approve it, but there's been upsets by the homeowners on Bell Road and everything. I'd like you to take the pledge that you will not accept any contributions to your campaign from anyone associated with this project. Not a restaurant, not a lawyer, not a contractor, nobody related to this project, not their spouses, and that that would demonstrate transparency and proof that you believe in the project, but you didn't sell out. And so I'd like you to take that pledge now. Anybody want to raise their hand? Thank you, Eric. Yeah.
Anyone else from the audience like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to oh, sure. Name and address for the record, please.
Hello, my name's Chris Durbin, 7412 McCoy Street. Really the only thing I wanted to put out there was we heard the representation of this developer say that you can always make your decision later by not passing a motion for a bond. And I just really want to caution you against that. That's a very dangerous path to walk down. You know, this whole project succeeds as a whole project or it fails as a whole project. So you can't, once you get to that point, you can't really pick or choose, you know, who your tenants are going to be to make this thing come together in the way that you want it to come together. So if you can't conceptually visualize how this thing might turn out and be accepting of that now, then vote no. If you're okay with not having any idea what's going to go in this thing and understanding that you might have to make some difficult decisions later and pass those decisions because that's the only way to finish this project and pay back your bondholders, then go ahead and vote yes, but that's a pretty large risk to take. Thanks.
Anyone else from the audience? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to conclude the public hearing.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. The public hearing is closed. There are 4 recommended actions to consider. The first recommended action is to consider approving ordinance number 3256, adopting the Belmont Promenade redevelopment project plan, approving the execution of an amended and restated redevelopment agreement, rescinding ordinance number 3115, and rescinding portions of ordinance number 3192. Pursuant to KSA 121772, a vote of 2/3 of the governing body is required to approve a TIF project plan. Consequently, 6 votes are required for approval. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion. Motion's been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion passes with Councilmember Kimling voting in dissent. The second recommended action is to consider approving ordinance number 3257, amending ordinance number 3191 to modify the CID sales tax rate of the Belmont Promenade CID from 1.3 to 1.6%. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion passes and was that Councilmember Kimling and Councilmember Jenkins voting in dissent. The third recommended action is to consider approving ordinance number 3258, levying special assessments for the purpose of paying the cost of construction of the Belmont Promenade CID project. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
Motion approved.
Motion's been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion passes. Councilmember Kimling voting in dissent. The final recommended action is to consider adopting resolution number 1871 of intent to issue federally taxable private activity revenue bonds in the principal amount of $95 million for sales tax abatement on the cost of construction materials for the Belmont Promenade project. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion. Motion has been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. The next items are from the council committee meeting. Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 1 is to consider adopting Resolution 1872, authorizing issuance of general obligation bonds related to Facility Conservation Improvement Program. On January 8th, 2019, the council committee recommended 8-0 to forward the facility improvements and associated financing to the governing body for approval. The project identifies guaranteed savings for energy, operations, and maintenance in conjunction with construction improvements. General obligation bonds would be issued to fund the project and guarantee utility cost savings savings and capital cost avoidance savings would pay for the bonds over a 15-year term. A resolution is required.
Recommended action is to consider adopting resolution number 1872. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Motion has been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes.
Okay, item number 2 is to consider revisions to policy statement number 65, PS 65, Economic Development Fund related to the Shawnee Entrepreneurial and Economic Development Seed Program. On February 5th, 2019, the Council Committee recommended 7-0 that the governing body approve revisions to PS 65.
Anyone on the council have any questions or comments? Mr. Jenkins?
Just a brief comment. Ann, thanks for getting those modifications in there that we suggested during the last meeting, so I support it.
Thank you. Anyone from the audience like, oh, sorry, Mr. Neighbor.
Just to piggyback on what Eric said, this program has served us extremely well since 2012 when it was started. And I think these improvements are good and will help it continue to support the city in what we're trying to do with the Economic Development Fund.
Any other questions or comments? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Second.
Motion has been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes.
Okay, item 3 is to consider passage of ordinance numbers 3259, 3260, and 3261, amending various chapters of Title V of the Shawnee Municipal Code related to solicitors, massage establishments and therapists, and cereal malt beverages, and approving revisions to policy statement number 56, PS 56, city licensing fee schedule. On February 5th, 2019, the Council Committee recommended 6-1 that the governing body approve the elimination of solicitor permits and 7-0 to approve various revisions related to massage establishments and therapists and cereal malt beverage licenses and revisions to PS 56.
There are 4 recommended actions to consider. The first recommended action is to consider passing ordinance number 3259, amending chapter 5.56 of the Shawnee Municipal Code related to solicitor permits. Anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
Motion approved.
Motion has been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Second recommended action is to consider passing ordinance number 3260, amending chapter 5.40 of the Shawnee Municipal Code related to massage establishment and massage therapist. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Third recommended action is to consider passing ordinance number 3261, amending chapter 5.08 of the Shawnee Municipal Code related to the sale of cereal malt beverages and alcoholic liquor. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Final recommended action is to consider approving revisions to policy statement number 56, PS 56, city licensing fee schedule. Does anyone on the council have any questions? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda, staff items. Item number 1 is to consider the disposal of property located at 5620 Meadow Height Drive. This property was purchased by the city in order to complete drainage improvements related to the 2007 Monticello Meadows project. On March 23, 2015, the governing body identified this property as surplus property as provided by policy statement number 69. Disposal of real property, the city has received an offer to purchase the property for $35,000. The recommended action is to consider approving the sale of property and authorizing the mayor to sign a quitclaim deed, contract, and any required closing documents in a form approved by the city attorney. Is there any discussion from the council? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Item number 2 is to consider approving the 2019 addendum to the 2017 mowing contract. On February 27, 2017, the governing body approved the 2017 mowing contract with Kansas Land Management. March 26, 2018, the governing body approved the 2018 addendum. The contract allows for an additional 1-year extension. Staff has identified 4 new locations to add and 3 locations to decrease from the contract for a total contract amount of $227,610.32. Recommended action is consider approving and authorizing the mayor to sign the final addendum to the contract. Is there any discussion from the council? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Item number 3 is to consider contract number 2019-028, a reimbursement agreement with Johnson County for the 67th Street and Cottonwood Drive. Preliminary engineering study, PN 3464 SMP MC 21073. 2003 study identified the culvert crossings in the vicinity of 67th Street and Cottonwood Drive to be a potential flooding concern. Johnson County Stormwater Advisory Council requires that preliminary engineering study, PES, be completed for each flood correction project. The county's portion of this PES, $44,160. City's portion of this study was $14,720 and will be funded out of the Stormwater Utility Fund. Recommended action is consider approving and authorizing the mayor to sign the contract. Is there any discussion from the council? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Motion approved.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is miscellaneous items. Item number 1 is to ratify the semi-monthly claim for February 25th, 2019 in the amount of $2,746,502.33. Is there any discussion from the council? Anyone from the audience like to speak to this item? I'll accept a motion.
So moved?
Second.
Motion's been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Miscellaneous council items. Does anyone on the council have an item they would like to discuss? Mr. Neighbor.
Kudos to all the guys that stay up all night and snow. We certainly appreciate it. I have had a number of phone calls and I asked people how's the snow removal and everybody appreciates it. It's been done. It's been done right. And my citizens are saying it's been such a job.
Absolutely. When we very first got on the council, remember that was one of the biggest things we got complaints about. And
Yeah.
we've never had a complaint in the past few years, not
No,
one.
we've done good.
Just
Yeah.
a question
Mr.
on it,
Jenkins?
though. I think, yeah, everybody's done a great job. It's not about that. It's just about, how are we doing on supplies and stuff? We've probably been burning up quite a bit this year.
We ordered some more, didn't we?
I know, I saw we were ordering some more.
Yeah.
In good shape? Thanks.
Okay.
We're good. Let us know, let us know, let us know. Okay.
Don't Murphy it.
Careful
Are there- Yeah. Are there any other items? Okay. If there are
Motion
no
to
other
adjourn.
items, I'll accept. Motion to adjourn.
Second?
A motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you.